I'm Bill Oughton of Oughton Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster. Hey, Chantal, how are we today?
We're fine. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm on the road today, so I'm working out of a little motel here in the middle of nowhere. But that's kind of comes with the territory. So
Yeah, technology is so fascinating. Now you can be in New York, I can be in Kansas. We're still sitting
if
here
this place
talking.
if this place was a mile down the road, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation because the internet here is like in little tiny areas. And it happens
Spots.
to be here at this motel, so we're in luck.
Mm, 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 mm. Okay, so today I thought we would talk a little bit about maybe something that is um, a little weird, a little something that most people don't think about. And that is perhaps an insurer's or a carrier's duty to a third party claimant. Now, I know that a lot of people will sit there and say, oh, but the carrier doesn't have any duty to the third party claimant because, in liability claims, for example, because they are not a party to the insurance contract, which is between the policyholder and the carrier. I would say that's correct, but my thinking is, are we as the carrier protecting our insured? Are we doing our fiduciary duty to protect our insured, to indemnify our insured, to, take care of those claims if we're over here allegedly lowballing a claimant just because we don't have a duty to them or something like that. By the way, Louisiana just had an interesting law take effect in August that we can talk about in regards to that. Mostly first party, but again, I think that it has to deal with us treating our insureds well. And so by extension, taking care of the claimant, the third party claimant.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. There's no privity of contract between the claimant and the insurance company. There's no duty that they owe them contractually other than to indemnify the policyholder, but they also have to defend the policyholder.
Right.
Now, because of that, they have to balance the I would say duty or obligation to settle a claim fairly with the duty to indemnify or sorry to defend that case and resist payment where resistance is required.
Well, what you were saying that we still owe that duty, and just because they're not a third party, we don't negate that duty. And I was going to say you're absolutely right. I mean, the contract and our duties don't change. It's just how I am suggesting that we look at these types
Sure.
of duties. Because if you recall, the very first line or insuring agreement in liability policies is, we will reimburse you for what you become legally liable for, the physical damage and the bodily injury that you become legally liable for. So by us being, and by us, I mean the carriers, the adjusters, or whatever, um, punt kicking these things down, asking, for example, a third party, an unrepresented third party claimant to go get their own medical bills when they probably don't know how to do it, go get their own police report, may antagonize things. And therefore, you as the adjuster may not be best serving and protecting your insured by pissing off the claimant, who then gets an attorney, who then goes and files suit.
Sure. You want to
Sim-
maintain, so we call that in the business maintaining control of the claimant. Yes,
exactly.
you can ask them to do all of the work that you could and probably should do as an adjuster for the carrier. You could just put it all on them and say, look, you have to prove your case. So put an evidence package together, make your demand, and we'll just sit tight and wait for it. And if we don't get it, we'll just close the file. That's one way to handle a claim, right?
Absolutely.
But and I'm not going to sit here and say that you're doing anything contractually wrong by doing it that way.
I'm not saying that either.
Although you may be, if that behavior and that methodology results in an excess verdict against your policyholder, which it very well could if the claim is handled poorly. On the flip side, if you step in and say, look, I'm the adjuster assigned to the claim. We want to pay claims that we owe, and we have to defend claims that we have to defend. And here's the process. Here's some things that I can do on my end, and here's some things that I need from you to do on your end. And together, we're going to get through this to the end. And it may result in a denial of liability. To be honest, I don't know where it's going to go right now because we don't know all the facts yet. But once we get those facts, we can make a decision. So
Absolutely.
there's a stark contrast between the two methods of handling a claim. And I think one thing that's non-negotiable is treating claimants with dignity and respect and professionalism.
Yes.
And that's not, I don't think, outlined anywhere in the insurance policy. But I think if you are in this business, you are held to certain um, ethical standards that you should comply with. I think those should be taught. I think the CPCU teaches us those. And I think at a minimum, people in a claims department should be familiar with the CPCU canons, ethical canons, and kind of weave that into your culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're saying everything that I totally agree with. I'm not saying that even though it is the claimant, the third party claimants, it quite frankly is even the first party. In depending on what policy you've got, if you've got an open peril policy, a special form policy, it's for the insured, I believe, to prove that, or no, it's for us to prove that you didn't have a loss. All they got to do is sit back. But if they have a named peril policy, like an HO2, CP2, basic, broad, whatever, then it would be on the carrier to prove that a loss fell within coverage. Same thing with our third party liability. The claimant would have to prove that our insured, the policyholder, is legally liable for this. And it is perfectly allowable for an insured, or excuse me, the adjuster to sit back and do nothing. However, again, that antagonizes our claimant who already has a bias against us, already thinks that we're getting ready to rip them off by lowballing or whatever, and are not settling, denying the claim. And then we have on top of that our the capability of, if the claimant sues the policyholder, they lose, and the policyholder feels that we, as the carrier, could have settled within policy limits because they get that excess verdict that you're talking about. That policyholder can turn right back around and sue the carrier for bad faith. So again, in my mind, this is another way for adjusters to protect themselves, protect their carriers, protect the insureds. I mean, it just seems like a symbiotic relationship to me rather than this is the duty to the insured, this is the duty to the third party claimant.
When it comes to these ethical questions and these duties that you might owe to third parties, there's two ways to look at it. And one is the cultural level of a carrier and the claims department and how people are taught how to handle the claims. And if a claims department teaches a certain way to handle claims, and the adjuster might feel proud that they're doing their job the way they were trained to do it, even if that training is missing the mark. So if you've got for example, a bad adjuster training other adjusters, you're
Yes.
going to have a crew of bad adjusters, and those adjusters won't even know they're doing
But
things.
But if they listen to, who is it? Scott, Brandon,
Yeah.
um, who else was our new third
Our
person?
listeners,
Yes.
we have,
Scott,
it's
Brandon.
on the tip of my tongue here.
Oh my
I just
God,
saw a
we're gonna
picture of
lose
him.
them.
He was at a golf tournament. Um,
We're gonna lose them.
it's going to come to me. It'll come to me. But yeah, our listeners
I need to write them
understand
down.
because we talk about this kind of thing.
Yes. If they
We talk,
basically that's what I was trying to say. If they listen to
yeah,
us.
and I think it's simple. Well, back to what I was talking about. You've got the culture side at the company, and then you got the adjuster side. And if you feel like you're doing what you're being told to do by your superiors, but it makes you feel icky, maybe it's time to find another place to work.
Mm,
Um, Maybe it's time to maybe try and change the culture,
yeah.
so that you kind of feel good about what you're doing. I mean, I said this once on TikTok, I think it was, that adjusters hate writing denial letters. It's like it's a
Yes.
pain.
It
It's
is.
much easier to write a check than it is a denial letter. So the idea that we just love to get in there and deny claims is silly. And I got flack from it. People were like, the one guy said, "Oh, I heard this when I was a kid. This is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you," kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Basically calling BS on the
Right.
premise that we dislike writing denials. Um,
But
but
it is true because it not only has to, we have to write a letter to be fully informing our insured as to why it's declined, and usually it will be uh, coverage in that particular instance. But you can't even decline coverage and or liability for a third party claimant. But again, we have to remember that there are so many more steps in a declination. So it is a lot easier for us to just pay it, you know?
yeah,
And then no one yells at us. I mean, because you
right.
got to think too, when we deny something, we're going to get phone calls and Department of Insurance complaints
And there's
and
a fair bit of risk involved because if you make that denial, prepare that denial without all the information, for example, maybe you think you've got all the information, and maybe a reasonable person would do exactly the same thing you did, but later you find out something new. Um, you know, that could be a bad situation. There's bad faith statutes and things like that,
Mhm.
to worry about.
Uh,
You don't
like,
have any of that stuff to worry about if you're just writing a check to somebody.
no, you don't necessarily. One of the things that I think a lot of adjusters are told to do is like, okay, so the third party claimant is, they have to prove their own claim, so they need to be gathering all this information. But again, we need to realize, again, thinking about the claimant and putting our grandmother in the claimant's shoes, would our grandmother know to go get medical records and medical notes, medical invoices, and send that all to us. And so the way that I would do this, much like what you had just said, Bill, because you were talking about how to set up a claim, and it was brilliant. I was sitting there thinking, oh, maybe we should do like a little back and forth talking between what the first contact of a third party sounds like, um, is to tell that third party as well, hey, I'm going to be sending you some documents. There's going to be a lot of authorizations in there. Um, is work authorization so I can talk to your boss and get your information about your lost wages, medical authorization so I can get your, medical records and bills. You can gather all that stuff if you want, feel free, but it's sometimes hard. And, I'm happy to do it. Sometimes they charge you, keep your receipts, but also sometimes they don't listen to me because I'm not the patient. And so if you're wanting to settle and everything, then here you go. I mean, this is what I'm going to need. Like you said, I'm going to need XYZ. So I'm going to try to get it. But if I can't, then I need you to get it.
Yeah, and a lot of times the collection of the documentation and information we need is regarded as a delay tactic,
Mm, mm,
and and that's a you know I get it. They're in a hurry to get some money for their injury. I get that, but there's a process here. If we didn't follow that process and just wrote checks out for whatever people wanted, um, it'd be pretty detrimental to the industry. I know I'd be out of work.
right. And do you know why we have to do that, Bill? Like
Get
why we
the
have to have all of that documentation? Because I mean, I feel that if we have some younger listeners, they may be going like, "Oh God, this is the boring conversation." Why are they? I mean, why do we need this? Uh,
why do we need medical records? Well, that's to prove the injury and to prove it was related to the incident, to prove the severity of the injury, to prove that the medical bills align with the medical records. So we're not paying for your allergies that you've had for 5 years.
mhm,
We're not paying for physical therapy from a prior car accident 10 years ago, whatever. So that's why it's to prove the case to the imaginary god of insurance who's sitting up there judging whether or not a claim should be paid or not. That's an interesting concept. I never really thought about it that way until just now, but there's this kind of judge in the back of my head
mm,
who is waiting for the information. And for me, that's really my client. Okay, so it's this
mhm,
ogre in the back of my head waiting for the information and documentation that they need to justify whether to pay the claim or deny the claim. And that's more than just medical records. It's statements from people, it's video surveillance, security camera stuff, it's photographs,
mhm,
it's medical records and medical bills, and it's statements from their employer. It's all this stuff that is used to prove what the person is telling you about their injury. If they say, look, I broke my ankle, I can't work for 12 months, I make X amount of dollars per year.
mhm.
This really hurts bad. So I want a lot of money to compensate me for the pain and suffering I've been enduring. Um, you can say all that in a phone conversation. You can even put all that in an email, but we can't pay the claim until we've got proof of all of those things that you're saying about the damages. We have to prove that it was a broken ankle. We have to prove that it actually took 12 months for it to heal. We have to prove how much time you missed from work and how much money you didn't get because you were not at work. And was that offset by any disability payments, or did you have any time paid time off that applied to that? All those things. So it is a process to get that. Medical records take a very long time. I mean, 6 months is probably the longest I've seen for medical records to come in. But in many cases, the delays aren't just because the medical record facilities or whatever are sitting on their hands. It's because the hospital uses some outsourcing company to warehouse all their records. So you got to go through them. But you don't know that until you send your letters to the facility. Then they send those letters to their vendor. Then their vendor looks it up, and then their vendor reaches out to you by mail or fax or email. You don't know. And they never code things right. They never put the claim number where it should be. So half of it goes to junk mail or half of it just gets lost in the shuffle and you don't really know where it goes or what it's for. And then by the time you realize, oh, this is a notification that I gotta, pay $30 for, some medical records. So then you got to send the money to them. Then they get their money. Then they release the records, and then they send it by some encrypted email, which again has it sits there in your email box. You don't know what it is. And then, yeah, it's so there's a lot of delays kind of baked into getting those records. The other delay is that, we can't get those records until you're done treating because the records aren't complete yet. So
Exactly.
there's that. Um, so all those things are pointed to as ways to delay the claim. What's the phrase? There's a book out there, delay,
Delay, deny, and defend.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we're not doing that on purpose.
Mm-mm.
I wish the process was easier. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
would be nice if it was. I mean, part of my job is to make that process easier for my clients because the desk adjusters don't have to deal with that. They let us do it. And it's a hassle. And we've got it streamlined about as much as you can get it streamlined. Um, I mean, I say that, but there's always something we can improve. And I only know that because every year that goes by, we make improvements to make things go quicker. But bottom line is, we're not doctors and we can't heal people quicker. So that's the biggest delay.
True. Okay, so you had mentioned so many things, and I'm over here taking notes, going like, yes, this is all correct. So
These when we agree, they make really boring
we
podcasts.
do. We do. And I'm sorry for that. But so I'm trying to interject some things in there saying like, oh no, it's not that. Because one of the things that I wanted to mention when you were talking about if you went to the hospital and then you went to physical therapy and blah blah blah. This is one of the reasons why adjusters, I'm telling you to try to get that authorization early, like really, really early, because just because they finished with their therapy or whatever, you don't have to wait until the very end. So if they went to the hospital, right? If they went to the hospital and then they're going to physical therapy or a chiropractor or whatever, if you've got that authorization, request the medical bills and records from the hospital, from the ambulance right then and there so that you can have it because it does take about 6 weeks to 2 months, and then of course put it on your diary and follow up. Um, I also, one of the things that I always did was I don't just let things cruise just because it's the claimant's duty to settle this claim. I still call them once a month. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? You still treating? You still off work? Yada yada yada, blah blah blah. If you are off work, or if your claimant is off work, they should have a doctor's note
Mhm.
saying that they need to be off work. You don't just get to be off work because you don't feel good. It's kind of like
Right,
school. It's
right.
kind of like school. You kind of need a doctor's note. I want to know that a medical doctor told me why can't, if you've got a broken ankle, why can't you sit? Is there some reason why you can't sit and do your job? I don't know. I mean, if I had a broken
Everybody's
ankle,
job is different.
yeah, every job is different. If I had a broken ankle, I could still work.
Right.
You couldn't probably, or maybe you would do light duty because you wouldn't be able to go out in the field, for example.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
one of the things here we can argue today. So one of the things I'll push back on the authorizations, getting them early. It seems like it used to be you could get the authorization first week of the claim and just hang on to that until they finish treating and then send your request in. But now what the providers are doing is they're looking at the date they signed it. And if there's treatment after the date, they won't release the records.
hmm.
So you got to go get a new release. So we've gotten because we get so many rejections, we've stopped requesting them until their treatment's complete. And of course, claimants feel like we're just kicking the bucket down the road, but we can't get the record. It's just not. It's
Okay. Yeah, I think that this is a very good point because, of course, my um, first thought, and again, are the unfair settlement practices in most states are first party oriented. Very few have to do with liability. But one of the rules is for, and again, this is first party, is that we give all of the um, authorization. We give all the things that we need signed as the carrier. Everything that we want the claimant either first, usually first, let's just say first, the first party claimant to give to us, we have to give to them if we're going to make it a requirement of settlement, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think that we could still explain that to the claimant by giving that to the claimant, at least because even these authorizations, I know a lot of authorizations only want like that medical facility to be listed, like not a general
No,
authorization
no, you can't do
either,
that. Yeah.
and
And it's very specific dates
it
or injuries
it
involved.
is, exactly. And so in that particular instance, again, I would be like, okay, Mr. Claimant, I'm the adjuster. I'm going to have to send you like a lot of different things as we go along. And we haven't even begun to talk about when we talk about delay, deny, defend, this trope that is going on with the plaintiff bar, which may not be a trope. I mean, we talked with Quentin last week or week before last, and there are a lot of things that carriers do to uh, instigate suit, and delaying happens to be one of them. But so I would always say, look, request soon, request those things soon. And if you happen to have a claimant who happens to be very injured and they're unrepresented, and if they're very injured and unrepresented, it is rare that they're unrepresented. However, I one of the notes that I have down here is that we can do a partial settlement. So I was going to talk about that thing real quick as I got distracted. But um, let's say that they have an MRI or something to that effect. They went to the
Mhm.
hospital, they've done some treatment, they're not getting any better. Now they're going to an MRI before they go back to the doctor again. They're only hopefully going to have one MRI. So you can get the hospital bill and then you can get the MRI bills and records while we're waiting for like the doctors and all that. I guess that's what I'm trying to also say.
Yeah, you and I have talked about the voluntary partial payment, prior to settlement before.
Hmm.
And my whole career, it's only been once or twice where that has come up. Um,
It
I would
doesn't happen
recommend
often.
it under certain circumstances, though. And one of the circumstances that I recommend it is when you've got a very catastrophic injury and they're not represented, and they have no intention of being represented. Yet the injury is very severe, and you're likely going to be paying a large sum, in some cases, policy limits. It makes sense there's no good reason not to do it other than you want to hold on to your loss reserves. You want to hold on to your cash as much as you can.
Don't do that because it's going to push someone to an attorney.
Well,
Um,
I can tell you the one time it was tried, they went and got an attorney anyway.
Well, yeah, no. And it's not, I mean, I have done it and they've gone to an attorney anyway.
Mhm.
Usually, let's talk real quick about partial payments. Okay, so we've got an insured, or excuse me, a claimant, a third party claimant, because as we know, we don't settle because it's a liability. We don't settle the claim until they get finished treating. And the reason why is for reasons why we've mentioned previously. We got to get all the medical, we've got to get everything, make sure that everything is related, blah, blah, blah. Okay. As the months go on, if it is a catastrophic loss, well, for example, I'm thinking of a case where a claimant got hit by a big rig. They got med flighted out. They did not have medical insurance. So, I mean, we're talking, 20, 30,000 for the helicopter flight and the hospital bill each. I mean, because those things are expensive. And Those people months later started getting collection phone calls because the hospital and MedFlight and all of them weren't waiting for these guys to get better and for me to settle at the,
Right.
very end, or, they have to file suit to protect their statute or whatever. And so in that particular instance, adjusters, what you can do is go to your supervisor and say, "Hey, I'm looking to pay this one hospital bill of 20,000 something dollars. Liability is clear. You know,
That's an important thing.
it is an important thing. You
You've got to
must
have a
have
case where
liability.
there's no questions of liability to
Yes,
do this.
you have to have clear liability and clear coverage. Those are your two things. I mean, like you're going to be paying regardless. It's just a matter of when. So let me pay this hospital bill. Let me pay this doctor bill at the hospital. Let me pay the x-ray, the doctor x-ray. I mean, like all of that. Let me pay the med flight, all of that. It's going to be $50,000 total. I'm going to send it directly to the hospital, directly to the, med flight people, blah, blah, blah. Um, and that way you keep your goodwill with your claimant. Now, here's what you would need. You get a partial release or an advance pay. I would do an advance pay.
Some sort of, it's just a receipt of
It's a
some
receipt.
sort. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a receipt. I would do an advance pay. It's not like a total
It's not
release or anything
extinguishing
like
the claim. It's not,
right.
I wouldn't use the word release because that
Yeah, it does send the wrong
suggests that
vibes. You're
you're trying to
absolutely right.
get
Yeah.
rid of the claim that way.
Uh
But the other thing when it comes to clear liability, that's a rarity when you have a case where there's absolutely clear liability. Now, sometimes it's statutory, where, with labor law 240, somebody falls from a height. Uh, the owner and GC are strictly liable. There's no partial liability there. But if there are other cases where you've got a policyholder who really screwed up, they've made a big mistake somehow, and they admitted it over and over and over in your statement. I've taken statements where they've said the words, "it was my fault," over and over and over again in the statement. Those are tough to fight. Um, and we can talk about, what if there is no liability and they admit liability in the statement? Then what do
oh,
you do? But
well, that's a whole nother
that's
podcast.
other podcast. But the cases with clear liability are rare because there's always seems to be some shared liability. And we do a
Yeah.
lot of slip and fall cases here in upstate New York. I, when the weather turns bad, I find it very hard to put 100% liability on a property owner
I do
when
too.
everybody knows what the winter does around here, you know?
Okay, but I want to talk about some other things though
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Um, one of the reasons that adjusters can use when they're talking to claimants, third-party claimants, like, you're just delaying the settlement and by requesting this stuff late and blah, blah, blah. Of course, all of this should have been explained in your very first phone call. Like, I can't request your stuff until you get finished treating. And then generally it takes 2 months for me to get that stuff back. Sometimes you can get it faster because you're the person, the patient, blah, 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 keep those receipts, yada, yada. And then you explain it every single time for 3 months or however long they, treat. Like I said, I call them every 30 days saying, "Hey, how you doing? Okay, remember, I'm going to have this, and this, and yada, 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 and blah, blah, blah." And they still get mad at me. But regardless, another thing that you can say to them is, "Look, the reason why I have to have this is not only because I have to prove to someone looking over my shoulder that everything is related, but think about it if you were wearing the other shoe. If you were involved in an accident, you were at fault, and that claimant was making a claim against your policy, you would want me to make sure that everything was correct. And this is what brings, because everybody's paying attention to premiums right now, since we are in a hard market, this is what brings equity to our premiums. I know this because we just happened to be studying it in RMI this week, risk management and insurance, my class. And this is what brings equity to your premiums is by us making sure that we are paying what is owed, no more, no less. And that's think about it. That's what makes your premiums affordable. That is what you would want us to do if the roles were reversed. You would want us fighting for you just as much as we're fighting for this policyholder. So, there's that. And of course, we haven't even talked about how going through CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare or medical services slows things down because
Yep.
they don't take anything until um everybody gets finished. And
Yeah,
then and then they take like
they won't tell you what the lien is until the treatment's done.
mhm,
And then they'll send you a conditional letter, meaning it's conditioned on, payment within certain time. Um, yeah, that complicates things for sure,
yeah.
especially with elderly folks, because they
Oh
don't
yeah.
understand why the process is the way it is. Maybe they do because they're dealing with Medicare so often and they're probably jaded against it to where they just throw their hands up and, oh, yeah, Medicare, I know.
Yeah.
But it makes it tough.
So the one thing that I always talk about too when it comes to this thing about lowballing. And if you hadn't heard, we've been throwing the word around lowballing. And if you don't know what it is, it's this idea from the plaintiff bar or claimants that we as adjusters have an authority limit or we valued a claim at a certain amount and that is the value of the claim, right? Because that's the value that we put on our reserves. And if we settle beneath that or if we offer some lower amount than what we have valued at it, that means that we are, quote, lowballing the claim. We're deliberately offering a lower amount than what the claim is worth. And this is not true for many reasons. One of them, as Bill said, is that you don't have 100% liability.
Mhm.
If we've got pure comparative, I never know. I never can remember what all of them are, even though I teach it. It's like moral and morale hazards. What are the differences? I don't know. Anyway, um, but maybe the claimant is 30% at fault. And so if we say that the value is $100 of this claim, they're only going to get $70. Well, we're not lowballing. They have to pay $30 because they're 30% at fault.
Mhm.
You know, I also have always thought of this as usually you have a range, a settlement range of let's say, 75 to $100 to make it nice round small numbers where I can think of. So if I start at 75, that doesn't mean I'm lowballing. That's the settlement range.
Mhm.
If I give you 100 and my reserves are at 100, that doesn't mean that I've settled for quote unquote the correct amount. $85 could be the correct amount. It's a range. Just like there's a speed limit range, and most people don't know that, but there's a speed limit range. So,
There's a an attorney that's doing ads up here in New York, and I think the quote goes something like this: if you ask or if you give a case to five different attorneys, you will get five different settlement amounts.
mhm.
Go with us because we're always the highest of the five. Something
Right,
along those
right,
lines.
right, right.
But there's a kernel of truth there that you know beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and
Mhm.
the settlement amount is in the eye of the whoever's on the other end of the line. Um, and people think we have some sort of chart or book or price list for certain
Yeah,
injuries, and
yeah.
it's not that way. Every one of them's different. Yes, there's similarities. You can try malfracture. You can look at a dozen of them. They're probably all going to be very similar. You
Hmm.
probably get a dozen of them that people slipped on black ice. But one person was 68 years old, one person was 35 years old, one person weighed 400 pounds, one person weighed 80 pounds. One person was an athlete, one person was drunk, one
Mm.
person was, walking with a cane.
All
Sorry,
of those things
they're different, all of
make a
them.
difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, haven't brought it up recently, but I'll go ahead and bring it up. In my book, Once Upon a Claim, Fairy Tales to Protect Your Assets, I actually have, because it's to teach claimants what adjusters think about, I actually have the story of Hansel and Gretel, where they are talking about how to determine uh, people's bodily injury, or worth or whatever. That's what the story is about. And it's supposed to teach you how to, um, how adjusters kind of think about that. And it's true. It is completely and totally based off of what you as the claimant are. This idea, and I haven't heard it in years, so maybe the idea has finally died, of three times medical, is not correct. Someone can let me know if that's still going on, but
Well, I mean, it might be correct on one day if you get the right claimant who wants to settle for that amount. Um,
I used to get them asking, "Oh, I've got $1,000 in medical, so therefore, I want $3,000," and I'm like, "Nah, you can't do that that way."
you can. I mean, part of the part of adjusting, by the way, is justifying what you pay.
Yes.
And if three times if three times medical is the what you're using to justify it, or if that's what the claimant uses to justify it, then so be it. Moral of the story? I didn't read this part.
Oh my gosh, this is one of my favorites. And actually, my editor, she was laughing at it when I did it. It's Hansel and Gretel, guys. That's what we're doing. If you're not watching YouTube, I'm showing pictures. And completely ignoring Bill while I'm like playing with my book. But I uh,
Promoting the book.
do promoting my book. Yes, that's true
Promoting.
too. So Hansel and Gretel, and one of the things that I rewrote it, and the editor was like, "You are probably going to have a lot of people be upset about this one particular story, because it is a VA meeting, set in a church, which is a villains anonymous meeting." And it's set in a church because Big Bad Wolf is there. Nessie Rosa, the Loch Ness Monster is there. Queen Morgana, Snow White's evil stepmother, she's there. And Shattenhax, which is the witch from Hansel and Gretel, she's there. And so Big Bad Wolf and Nessie Rosa sit there and talk about how they valued the pigs that they ate, or the fish that they ate, or whatever. So, and it talks about how we value claims. Anyway, we as adjusters.
Yeah, it's well, like I said, there is an art to it, and it gives latitude for either side to be wrong.
It does. It does.
Because when the person with a stub toe asks for $1 million, they're wrong for
Yeah,
various. You can explain all the reasons they're wrong, but they can try and articulate the reasons that they're right. Maybe it
absolutely.
really, really, really hurt, and they just had their nails done. And
I mean, and then you have to go back to the pedicure chair with the massaging chair. It is a pain.
lose a day of work. I mean,
Yeah, it's
um,
so the mental frustration right then and there. I tell you what.
but there are justifications that people have for the value of their claims, and I'm not trying to minimize that, because that's important. They have reasons why they might come up with the number they have in mind, and you might have reasons to reduce that number.
Mhm.
And it's like this: when you're selling a used car on Craigslist or wherever, the value of that car is ultimately going to be what it sells for. And the same concept applies to claims.
Yes.
What's the value of a broken ankle? whatever it settles for.
Right.
That's pretty much it. There's no book, there's no chart. There's no chart there that says that one person's value is wrong.
Right.
What does dictate whether or not a value is wrong is if you can't justify it.
Mm.
If you're just being obstinate about it and not willing to negotiate, then you're probably not being fair.
That's when you're probably being lowballing. Like, if a claim is worth, honest to God, $5,000 and you go, I'm going to give you 500
Mhm.
and there's no reason whatsoever, no negligence on the claimant's part, no reason, the medical is fraudulent, the claim is fraudulent, the insured isn't liable. Just there no reason whatsoever. You just write down in your notes, I'm going to settle this for $500. You are lowballing then, and you are setting your insured up for a litigated case, and you're setting yourself up for a bad faith claim. And I guess this is the whole part that, you know, we are building up to is don't do that.
Well, obstinate goes both ways.
Yeah,
I mean,
true,
I've
true.
dealt with cases where the attorney demands the policy limit of $1 million, and we offer 100,000.
Mm.
Well, we're way apart, aren't we? So we try and negotiate. Well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we need to come up a little bit. Maybe they need to come down a lot. Um, and
That's
we get
something that Quentin and I don't know if we actually talked about it on camera or off camera, but I know he and I talked about how sometimes mediations work really well
right,
because of the fact that he may have an unreasonable client and an
right.
unreasonable claimant for us. Someone, and you would think that that client would listen to their attorney, but sometimes they get stars in their eyes because, their mother's boyfriend, ex sister-in-law, aunt, got $1 million for the same thing.
Hire somebody like me or a defense attorney to negotiate on their behalf. And sometimes me or the attorney will feel that the claim is worth a certain dollar amount, but they can't convince their client of that. And you get that barrier. And that happens on the plaintiff side too, where plaintiff's attorney is like, look, I know this isn't a $1 million case, but I can't get them off $1 million, and they want me to sue it.
Mm.
So that goes both ways as well. So this is just a dance. Sometimes it works out easy, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it means months of back and forth and arguments, and ultimately litigation. It's a job.
Yeah. And it's a fun job. It's a wonderful job.
Yeah.
So I think we've talked about everything that I wanted to talk about in
Yeah,
regards
this is an
to.
interesting topic, and it's one I deal with every day.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, it sounds kind of boring. It's not one of our usual banters or anything like that, but I think it is important for us to realize uh, not to mess about just because it's the third party. It does impact our insured, and ultimately, that's who we're out to protect.
yep,
All
very
right.
good.
So in 2 weeks, we will have the fraud guru, actually, Barry Zalma.
Yeah,
And if y'all don't already, subscribe to his newsletter, to his Patreon, and follow him on LinkedIn, please do, Barry Zalma. And he has forgotten probably more insurance than you and me put together.
he publishes very informative things every single day.
Every single day. I don't know where he gets all the ideas because I sit here and am looking at our podcast list going like, I have a couple of things that are blank. We don't know
Yeah,
what to talk about. I will find something to talk about, but
he's a content producing
he is.
machine.
He is. So I'm super excited to have him on our podcast in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So
And if you're interested in being a guest on this podcast, we'd love to talk to you. As long as you're going to talk about insurance claims and not, anything else.
Well,
So
we can turn pretty much anything into insurance.
yeah.
Because I mean, shoot, Taylor Swift has an insurance claim right now.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yep, she has canceled the rest of her Eras tour, at least in Europe, I believe, because of bomb threats, because of terrorist
Yeah,
threats. So,
that
I
I
mean,
heard. That I heard. I think I
very
would
good.
recognize her in person, but I'm just not one of those, I'm not up with the pop music scene.
Yeah.
I would be the guy in those videos where she would come down and sit next to me and ask me for, directions, and I'd be like, "Oh, it's over
Yes,
there,"
yes,
not
okay.
even know who I'm talking to. So,
So you want to hear my favorite, my famous story, like
sure.
me running it? Okay. So this is how oblivious that I am. And it is that I was in France. This is when I was celebrating my birthday. And apparently Jake Gyllenhaal, the actor, was standing like right behind me, and I'm flirting with the butler, as one is wont to do when one has a butler. Or the concierge, or whatever you want to call them, but they called them butlers. And I turn around, walk right past them, never, you know, clock them. And my two friends are like, "Oh my God, did you see Jake Gyllenhaal?" Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "No, I was flirting with the butler." Like, who's more important, the butler who can get me stuff, or Jake Gyllenhaal who's going to ignore me anyway?
Very cool. Well, I don't really have any brushes with famous people that I know about, but maybe I'm oblivious and they're like sitting right next to me.
It could
Now,
be,
my
yeah.
sister, my sister ran into Jay Leno at a diner or restaurant with her family.
Uh-huh.
And she said, "You're Jay Leno." He said, "Yeah, I am." And he sat down next to him and had a conversation with him at their table. She got a
That's so cool.
selfie with him. He was a really nice guy. So,
That's cool.
but that's about as close to fame that I got.
Well, there's you and me. We're so famous.
I know. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
All
right.
right. Well, Bill, I will see you in 2 weeks then.
Yes.
Drive.
Broadcasting from my office instead of this motel.
Well, that'll be nice.
Yeah.
Okay. See
Take
ya.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.auton.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster.
In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.